All right. So, Jeff, I know that this is the lesson that you're feeling like didn't work so well last year. And
Yeah,
so, we're going to try and figure out how to transform it a little bit.
sure.
Your learning target is pretty straightforward, really clear. I love that. I can list, define, and provide examples of each of the 7 roles of the President of the United States. Is that changing? Do you feel like that still is
Yeah,
what you want them to
I,
do?
I'm not convinced that it's important that they can list the roles of the president. I think if they can identify the roles, they can be familiar with them. But I don't know if that list term is really needed for us.
Well, true, because we're not teaching them how to make a list,
No,
right? And
right,
that probably makes it more accessible for some of the kids.
right,
So define and provide examples. Isn't that in essence describing?
sure.
So could we just say, would it be right to say, I can describe each of the 7 roles of the president?
Yeah, I think that would really clarify that.
Okay.
I think it would clarify it.
Good. All right, great. So I can describe. So by the end of a lesson, or the end of, is this 2 or 3 days of material, or what are you
Yeah,
thinking?
I think in the past it's taken about 2.5 days to do, and so
Okay.
yeah, 2 or 3 day allotment of time for this I think would be sufficient.
Great, because it did sound like a lot
Yeah,
for some of our students,
right.
especially some of our students with IEPs. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is a lot in one lesson.
Yeah,
Okay.
seven roles of the president is a challenge for some
Yeah.
kids.
Okay. So what was difficult about it when you've taught it before?
A couple things that I think we've struggled with. Number one, just the amount, like 7 roles of the president, and that's a lot for students, for all students really, to remember, and not only remember but give some examples of it. So that's the first thing I think they really struggled with. The second thing is some of the terminology that we use for the roles of the president are foreign to the students. For example, there's one of the roles that we call chief of state, which is the ceremonial function for the president. And that word state kind of trips students up because when they hear the word state, they think Wisconsin, they think Minnesota.
Sure.
They don't think President Trump laying a wreath at Arlington National Cemetery as that role.
Right. So I hear you say 2 kind of primary things. One is memory issues, like remembering. They have to remember all 7.
Yeah,
And what those mean. And then the other is the term, some of the vocabulary that's within it.
right.
And that actually works in really well with the IEP goals for the students in our class that have IEP goals, because we have several that have memory goals.
Yeah.
And then the vocabulary is all about comprehension, and there's a lot of goals.
Right. I think
to
almost
that.
all of our students have some sort of goal related to that vocabulary.
Okay. Good. So I think we've got IEP goals in there. So, I was thinking about this. I had taken a quick glance at this morning, and I was thinking about what I know about the memory research.
Sure.
And so I want to come at it first from that angle. Are you anticipating that you're going to lecture about each of the roles?
Yeah, so what I've done in the past is kind of a couple different parts. So I'd lecture for 3, 4, 5 minutes about one of the roles. Then there'd be a discussion question where the students would have a partner and they'd discuss a scenario related to the role, and then we do some large group conversation. Those small partner discussions honestly haven't gone so well in the past. And I just don't feel like students get a good grasp on the role, so then they're not able to have a good conversation about it, and so it kind of has fallen apart.
Right. So when you're lecturing, students are taking notes?
Yeah, so they have a guided note sheet in front of them where they're writing down the definitions, and then they're also recording some examples of the president performing that role.
So I know some of our kids, when they're struggling with note taking, part of the issue is they're trying to multitask, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of cognitive load there.
Yeah.
So you're lecturing and you're probably giving some extra really great information, not
Sure.
just the line that's on the slide, but they're so busy trying to write down that exact line that they're not really listening
Sure.
to you.
Sure.
And I hate that they're missing all of that.
Yeah.
So I've recently been doing a lot of reading around memory, and one of the things that the research says is this concept of retrieve taking instead of note taking.
Sure.
So retrieve taking is you say to the students, I'm going to tell you for 5 minutes, or I'm going to lecture for a few minutes about this, and you are not allowed to take notes. So it's pens down, and they just have to listen to you. And then when you're done, you say, now write down everything you can remember about what I just said. So you forewarn them that that's what they're going to do.
Sure.
So what they're doing there is they're retrieving the information that
Yeah.
they've just heard. They're trying to retrieve that and write it down. And then you can have students compare their notes to a peer's notes or to your lecture slide or something and see if they missed anything.
Great. And if they did miss something, can they add to their notes at that point then?
Yes, they add that in.
Sure.
So what the research shows is that that's actually more likely to consolidate the memory than if they're doing that heavy cognitive load and multitasking and not paying attention. retention.
Yeah, I really like that because I'm not concerned in that. I'm not concerned that they can reiterate exactly, what I said, but have an understanding in their own words. And I think this is really allowing them to do that.
That also kind of takes care of any kids who have visual perception problems, where they're looking up at the board, and if far point copying is hard, or all of that, which just becomes difficult for them.
Sure.
The other thing is that there's a lot of memory research that says, as an example, that when you use a graphic organizer of some kind to gather your information rather than linear notes, that having information in locations on a page is easier to recall.
Oh,
so that's called episodic memory. So when you just have a long list of kind of linear sketch notes, much harder to close your eyes and picture where things were. Yeah. Whereas if instead you've got information in locations on a page, you can kind of close your eyes and think, okay, it was in that top right-hand corner, and it's easier to remember.
Okay.
So given that I knew that this is where you're going, I was thinking about, there's a memory strategy, I forget what it's called. It's like the mansion memory trick or something. Okay. But the idea is that the memory champions, there's a memory championship, an international memory championship. And what they do is they picture a house with lots of rooms, and then they put information in each room, and they travel through the house, and then they can remember, okay, I turned right here, and there was this, and so it's like this. So I was thinking if we could do a hybrid of that. What if we just had kids either draw, or we could give them like a 2-story house with 3 or 4 rooms on the bottom and a couple of rooms up top.
Sure.
And as they went through the 7 roles, they were actually kind of putting the roles in
each of the
spaces.
rooms.
And it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have some linear notes, but maybe all of their notes could be in rooms instead.
I love that. And because we're talking about the roles of the president, maybe we could even make it the White House as the house that was there. That would be
really great.
Yeah,
there'd be excess rooms, but we don't even need to be a specific replica of the White House. But we could, I would love that. I think that would be great. So I want to come back though. So that might be some things that we could do about memory, but then, I want to talk about terms, but before we get there,
sure.
7 roles.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've got multiple roles, is there a way we could do it in multiple stations?
Sure.
Instead of whole group?
Yeah, that might be more effective.
You don't need to get them all done in one day, so we could do 3 one day, 4 the next.
I like that. Yeah.
Now, if there's more than 2 and there's only 2 of us, that would mean we're going to have at least 1 station that has to be independent.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you think we could create a station that had some, using technology?
Yeah.
They were provided the information?
Sure. I think we could easily make a station just with some quick current event video clips of President Trump or another past president using or performing those roles, or you or I could make a really quick 5-minute video that summarizes the role with some examples. So I think we certainly can, maybe a QR code that the kids scan with their iPads when they get there and watch that.
Great. So some kind of flipped instruction in a sense, but right there in the room. Mm-hmm. And then we could have you at one role and I could be at another role. Now, what do you think about, I'm thinking about the students with IEP goals and really wanting to really double down on that memory instruction. Mm-hmm. So while we could give all the students, like I could give an overview to all the kids about that mansion idea, we're going to use the White House, we're going to put these in there, but I'd love to be able to really hit that harder with students that need that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what if we did at least one leveled group?
Okay.
So if we have 3 groups, we could have one that was leveled with kids with memory IEP goals.
Yeah.
And I could actually move with that group rather
good.
than me staying put.
Sure.
So whatever, that would mean that you'd have to move too, right?
Yep.
So if you have one station, I have another station, we'd both need to be able to know how to teach at each station.
Yeah, that's fine.
But then I could kind of double down on that.
I love it.
Okay, I like that better. But we still haven't addressed the issue around the terms.
Right.
So you said the word state would be tough. What other words would be tough for them to pick up on?
Another role of the president is the chief of the economy, and that term economy and economics is really a foreign term to a lot of our students. They've heard it, but they don't really have any idea what it means. So I think that's another one. Looking over the list here, just the idea of chief executive, this term executive is tricky.
Right, that means so many different things,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Business executive, executive function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess I would throw in chief diplomat too. And
Okay.
that term diplomat is another one that's new to a lot of students.
Okay. So there are actually, at least 4 terms. Are a lot of students going to be struggling with this?
I do. I think a lot of students are.
So that makes me think that we should maybe pre-teach that and come at that before we go into the roles.
Sure.
So would you be comfortable if I just created a kind of a vocabulary mini lesson? Well, it won't be really mini if we've got 4 different terms to teach.
No.
But if we did that, I've got a whole bunch of strategies that are really solid vocabulary instruction strategies that I could do that at the beginning of the lesson.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think when they got to the station on that role, then they could really build on that knowledge from the teaching.
Good. So that probably means that we'd only, just in terms of time, if we spent time on this vocabulary first, we might just get 2 stations the first day.
Yeah.
And then we could do 3 or 4 the next, and
Sure.
then the remaining ones.
We have to adjust
it. Is that
That sounds
all
great.
right?
Yeah.
So the one other thing, from a movement perspective, we'd have them moving from space to space, which is great, and the small groups I think will get great participation. But I'm just wondering if there's anything else that we might do about each of those roles that would add some body awareness, gestures, kinesthetics,
Sure.
something like that.
Yeah, so you're thinking like they make a gesture for each of the roles, invent one, or come up with one
Well,
that
maybe.
represents it?
So how do you memorize something? If you had 7 things that you had to remember, how would you
So
do that?
sometimes I take like my body and I start with my feet and I make some way to remember it with my feet, and then I go up to my knees and do something else. So that's what
Do
I
you
do.
really?
I do. Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
goofy, but
Yeah,
it's,
but it works for you.
Works for me. Right.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So that, we could teach them that. We could use the body with 7 different spaces on
Sure.
the body to do that.
Mhm.
Whether some teenagers would go down the wrong road with that, I don't know.
Too. Sure.
Or we could do a gesture type thing,
Sure.
that we create a gesture. Obviously there's some that would come easily,
Sure.
for
Commander-in-chief.
Commander-in-chief, but we could have. Do you think it would be better if the students created the gesture at the station, but then they might all have different, or should we
Right.
teach a gesture that, like, you and I just decide these are what we're going to teach?
Yeah, I don't know. Boy, there's some advantages I think to each approach
Yeah.
with it.
From a time angle, though, and a consistency angle,
Probably if we did it.
yeah, because otherwise, if we did have them create, because we're not doing whole group, in those small groups, they'd all have something different, and we wouldn't be able to use that as a reference point coming back to it
Sure.
later
Yeah,
as a reminder.
That's correct. Good
Okay.
idea.
Okay. So I think, we've kind of covered really just about everything in our steps.
Mhm.
How do you want to split it up? I can take on the vocabulary piece.
That'd be
that makes
helpful.
sense.
Yeah.
And I'll identify which students should be in the small group that'll move with me.
Okay.
And I could create like the White House map or house image and explain to the students what the research is on memory and why we're doing that.
Sure.
Would that work? And
Yeah,
then
I can take the stations and get
create the
stuff together.
content for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
That'd be great.
All right, great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.